Hi, it's me, Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut. Welcome to episode 8 of Spacewalk Podcast. Okay, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. We have to talk about the whole Starliner debacle thing quick. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it because it's been covered by a billion different, that's all anyone's talking about, so we'll just touch on it. I'll just give my thoughts on that. We'll also talk about some Blue Origin stuff with, after that first tour video is posted, and as we're waiting approval for part 2, we'll just kind of talk about a little bit of that kind of stuff. We'll also talk about some orbital mechanics, which is fun, and some far space future things. And of course, we'll touch on Starship for a minute. There's a good question that we had here from listeners. So join me on this spacewalk. Alrighty. How are you guys? I hope you're doing fantastic. We've had a beautiful few days here in Iowa, and the students are back at the University of Northern Iowa. For those of you that don't know, I live in a pretty small town in Iowa called Cedar Falls, Northeast Iowa, and it is a college town, of the smallest college in Iowa, which means it's probably a pretty small state college overall. But students are back, so as I walk around town, I try to not look like a completely crazy person, and I might, sometimes I have to hold my phone up to my ear so that when I'm talking to myself, it doesn't look more crazy than that normally does. So that's the scoop for me. It's just beautiful. It's been hot. It's been great spending a ton of time outdoors, ton of time with friends and family, and that is helping me reset while also trying to catch up on a million other things. And you may have noticed, actually, I think since the last time we did an episode, some new stuff. We got a few exciting things, like we released our 1969 collection. If you haven't seen that, you may have noticed in the Blue Origin video I was wearing a Saturn V shirt, kind of like a follow-up to our F1 shirt, kind of replacing that old F1 schematic shirt. And it's part of our 1969 collection. We have a ton of really I think it's easily my favorite collection so far. It's our most complete collection. We have an A7L hoodie that's designed and kind of mimics the Apollo EVA suit, and it's just incredible. I'm so proud of Allie for all of her work on this one. This is the kind of stuff that makes me excited, because half the reason for Everyday Astronaut and trying to make it like a quote unquote brand was the idea of trying to help make spaceflight feel cool and help rocket science seem cool, and not just like this nerdy, thing, but actually try to brand it as something exciting and cool and fun. And part of that is the reason for all the stuff that we do for the merch and stuff like that, is just to, and is to try to help it, elevate it to help it be cool, because I think it is the coolest things in the world. And Allie does a better job than anybody on that, in my opinion. So very excited about that. Also, like I said, Blue Origin Part 2 is coming out soon. We have, every company has an approval process. Blue has actually been great to work with, just to be clear. What I like for them is they do a lot of proactive things. So before I even get my hands on stuff, a lot of stuff has already been taken care of, so that we don't waste time having me edit something, then sending them that, and then hey, take this, and this out. You guys might be surprised. To be perfectly honest and transparent, there's a lot of stuff that can't be viewed by the public, because, a lot of the stuff, engineers will work for 7 years on some really cool, maybe novel concept, and they don't, frankly, want their competition seeing behind the scenes, seeing how the sauce is made, so to speak. So that's half the reason for some of the blurs or some of the cuts. Some of the cuts are more obvious than others. There's no getting around that sometimes. But I do a pretty sneaky job of sneaking cuts in sometimes, where maybe a whole few minutes. And you may notice in some of the tour videos, in the last Elon interview, for instance, a lot of people noticed that I was just sticking on his face for 7 minutes while we're talking and pointing at things that you don't get to see. And I know that was frustrating, and I had people calling me the worst names about it. It's I'm sorry, I was told that we can't show a certain thing that was happening in the background that the other camera had full view of. So there's things like that sometimes it's not even necessarily, you might think like, just show the part, just show the thing. But the reality is sometimes there's other things happening in the backgrounds that we can't show. So I would hope that people are just, and I know 99.9999% of you are just excited to be able to see anything. And I know there's a few vocal minority that like to, call names when things seem so simple. And they do seem so simple, but they just simply aren't. And I'm just so fortunate to be able to, shoot and do whatever I can for these videos, because those tour videos are some of my favorite videos that I ever get to make, because obviously I get to see some really cool stuff and talk to some really, really cool people, cool and interesting people. So there's more of that coming out, by the way. There's more tours. We're always kind of working with companies to try to get them in the schedule, especially around like a good time for them. And this is a reminder too, if you haven't watched the other tour videos, there's a lot out there. I mean, every single one has nuggets of information where I'm like, this is so, like, I don't get tired of them, because I always learn something and I always see something that's a first for me. An underwatched one is the Ursa video. So we went to Ursa Major in Colorado. That would have been in 2023. And it was awesome. I mean, it was such a cool tour. And, I literally got to be hands-on with a rocket engine and help build a rocket engine for a minute, which is really fun. But, I, again, just learned a ton there with their engineers. I talk a lot about the European one. That one's really fun for me, where we go to RFA and ESAR. And of course, even back in the day, I went to Firefly pretty early on and talked to Tarmar Cusick, who was at the time their CEO. He really smart guy, really, really enjoyed. I mean, that's still one of my tops. That one, I feel like I had a lot of new info coming my way, and I loved it. So, yep, just a reminder, if you're bored, watch some of those older interviews and tours, because they are fun to watch. So, yeah, okay, let's start getting into your questions here. Let's see. So, actually, since I'm not picking out a single comment for the Starliner stuff, because frankly, we've had so many just generic questions. I had so many people tagging me, asking me questions about the Starliner Fiasco. And I think that's the best way to put it, is fiasco. It is not good. Again, sorry, not to air my grievances upon you guys at all too much, but I had certain people saying that I was like defending Boeing by trying to explain the concept of what I meant by people thinking they're stuck in space, because that's a headline I saw everywhere. Everyone saying, Boeing left astronauts stuck in space. And of course, to a degree, of course that's true. Like, they don't have a vehicle that's certified to return those humans back down from the International Space Station. That is absolutely true. And I tried to explain that, but I think the problem is I've literally had friends and family call me or talk to me at a coffee shop or come up to me and go, hey, so, like, are they gonna run out of food? Are these astronauts are just stuck out there in space? Where are they? Are they like at the moon? The general public sees that headline, Boeing has astronauts stuck in space, and they literally think that there's a spacecraft out there, a tiny little spacecraft with two astronauts floating around stuck in space. That's what people think. And I was trying really hard on X to reiterate that no, they're not like floating around in space. They're safely harboring, they're safely hanging out on the International Space Station. And they can do that for, we have astronauts that have spent a year on the International Space Station, and it's a relatively mundane, safe thing at that point, right? Now, obviously, all things considered, it is very, very, very bad that the Starliner capsule is not considered deemed safe to be able to return them from the International Space Station. That is not good. I want to make that clear. This is bad now. This is 3 flight attempts with Starliner. And the second one went fairly well, which is surprising to me that they didn't see these kind of issues on the second flight test. I mean, they had some issues with their thrusters and a little bit, especially the first one with that was, the root cause wasn't necessarily like one of these dog houses like it is for this third flight. So I am just surprised that, like, how did it get like this? how did it get to this point? I don't know. I mean, it's wild to me, honestly. So here's the deal. The truth is, and I think Scott Manley's, I think his thumbnail was something like, Starliner might be safe, but SpaceX is safer. And that's the exact reality of this situation. And that's the conclusion that NASA came to. They're literally saying, between NASA and the Boeing engineers, are saying, you know what? It's probably 95% safe to return on Starliner. There's a very good chance that Starliner undocks autonomously, returns, and has a completely nominal safe landing that would have been completely fine for these astronauts. However, they can't exactly qualify and quantify just how safe. And frankly, it needs to be 99.7 or whatever it is, because it needs to be 1 in 270 chances. So if they can't say for certain with data that they think they can come back down 99.7%, chance of success of safely re-entering these humans back on Earth, then they have to look at other options. And that's the reality of the situation is, again, great chance that the Starliner comes back down perfectly fine. And we all look at this and go, they probably could have landed there and probably would have been totally fine and we wouldn't have to do all this shuffle. But NASA's being extremely, extremely cautious, which they should, because there's humans' lives at risk here. And I'd be curious, okay, so obviously Butch and Sunny are gonna do, and they've kind of said this in the press conference, they said it kind of like, they do whatever we want. So, I don't remember who said that, but it was almost like they do whatever they're told. And, and I think the meaning, the context in the press conference was, they do whatever, whatever we deem is safe, whatever our teams of experts literally studying this stuff, whatever they decide is the best option, they will do, because that's their job. Their job is to trust the teams and the experts. But I would be curious, all unfiltered, 20 years later, 30 years later or something, in a memoir, like, what would they do? What would they do in this situation? Would they, if they got the orders, hey, Starliner's looking good, or, even not Starliner's looking good, Starliner, here's the known issues. We think it's 98.7% safe, based on our simulations and based on our data. How do you guys feel? What would their decision be? Do you want to come home, or do you, on Starliner, do you want to, do the whole shuffle thing and do the Crew 9 return on Dragon capsule? So I don't know. I'm just rambling. I'm just talking. But the reality is, Starliner was deemed. They don't want to bring those astronauts back home on Starliner, and I mean, obviously that is the safer option, is to bring them home. I mean, that would be the safer option, even if everything was normal, is to bring them home on a completely proven system that's flown, 12 times or whatever, is to put them on Crew Dragon, of course. Like, that's always going to be the safer option at this point. But, how much safer? Can you qualify that? Can you quantify that? I don't know. The point being, Starliner's coming home empty, and they have to, there's just a lot of weird stuff. Like, they removed all the autonomous software from it. I'm guessing they did that just so they didn't have any accidental whoopsie-doos where, humans are flying and all of a sudden the computer intervenes and some line of code accidentally starts flying the vehicle and crashes it into the space station or something. I'm sure there's some reason why Boeing removed the autonomous procedures and undocking procedures and stuff. And I'm sure it does have to do with let's just make sure that everything works. It's just it's so disheartening, because it's, we're 9 years or 10 years basically into the program altogether, or 8 years in total of actually development, and how are they still making these same kinds of mistakes? How they're supposed to test these things end to end. How have they not? How have they removed software that they know worked? I don't know. It's pretty wild to me. This whole thing's going to be it's going to be a lesson, and it's going to be a lesson in mission management. It's going to be a lesson in program management. It's going to be a lesson in engineering a vehicle. It's going to be a lesson in, you know, not getting complacent with your contracts. It's going to be a lesson in a lot of things, but I'm altogether just, I am happy that they made the hard decision. And by hard, I mean like it's financially tiresome to not fly 2 new crew up there to the International Space Station and to basically have to, return these guys on Crew 9 is definitely not the ideal plan. But I am glad that Sonny and Butch are going to come home safe. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, and NASA knows that, and that's why they're doing this. So that's my rant on Starliner. Super long. Yeah. Oh gosh, it's just one of those, man, how did we get here? And I think right now the ultimate question, the long question is, will Boeing even be able to fulfill their 6 operational missions? The International Space Station is currently slated to retire in 2030. At this point, I don't think they can get 6, they're gonna have to fly this mission again, I'm guessing. Like, they're gonna have to fly a demonstration mission again, and at that point, they're still gonna have to fly, if they fly once a year for the rest of the 6 operational missions, yeah, the ISS won't even be around anymore for that 6th flight, 5th or 6th flight. So, and even, I don't think Boeing can afford to do this anymore. Like, they're already, what is it, $1 billion over, they've already lost like over $1 billion because they've had to do so many reflights of their system. So, I can see Boeing trying to get out of this because it's just costing them money. They're not going to make money off this. They're just losing more and more money. So that's the question to me, is like, will Boeing ever fly an operational mission is what I'm feeling right now. Yeah, I'd like to be proven wrong by that, but we'll see. Time will tell. Okay, let's get to your questions now, because we have some really good questions. The first one's kind of on the topic of that Blue Origin tour we were talking about. This comes from ex-subscriber Peter Helmer at Peter_PH or Helmer_PH, and this is, compare the Blue Origin factory to SpaceX and Firefly. I'm going to kind of wrap this into also part of the tour. So Firefly, when I visited them, they're still, their factory was relatively new. It felt very machine shoppy. It felt very people working on a high fuel dragster almost, like a race car in a factory, and that was cool. I liked that. These days, Firefly's area has grown up a lot. It'd be a lot different today, but I think Firefly felt very garagey, and I think nowadays is closer to operational, more maybe SpaceX Hawthorne. Starbase has in the past been extremely garagey or tenty, and very dirty, like very just rough and tumble, just get stuff done. But these days it's turning more and more into a traditional factory with the expansion of Star Factory. And Blue Origin is like the pristine, do it right the first time kind of feel of like, hey, we're just gonna build this. As they've had this massive factory out of the Cape for 4 or 5 years, and in what feels like and looks like a mostly done state, and now it's finally getting to the point where it's getting filled with rocket hardware. Whereas the inverse, like SpaceX built a rocket and then started building the factory around it. So it's all of them are ending up at the same point. I think all of these, any rocket factory will turn into a beautiful, pristine, spaceflight hardware factory, clean and modern and operational, et cetera, et cetera. But currently, Blue Origin has the nicest, cleanest, most operational factory that I've ever laid eyes on, really, besides, maybe Hawthorne headquarters has been operational and clean for a long time like that. And, maybe, I haven't ever been inside ULA's, but I've seen, Destin from Smarter Everyday has an awesome tour inside ULA's production facility. And that's always been similar, pristine, this beautiful workshop and beautiful rocket factory. So they're all going towards that, because that's just, eventually you care a lot about FOD, your foreign object debris. You care a lot about, cleanliness and air conditioning and all of the things So they all do end up working towards that, but I feel like with the companies we listed were just kind of in different states. And like I said, each of them, each company has a slightly different approval process, but they all are sensitive about, there's certain things that are illegal to share as far as a weapons perspective, because all of rockets are basically missile and weapon delivery technology. So there is considerations there of things we can't show and operations that we can't show, and there's topics that we can't talk about. That was something that that was a big problem with the last Elon interview, actually. For me was, how do we talk about things? We've generally and publicly, and I maybe should have thought more, like, I don't care necessarily about what I know. Let's reiterate what what's maybe been talked about on X or Twitter. Because generally, like, we know like everything almost available Elon talks about on X, and it's amazing, and we see everything. And so I have this like snobbish attitude sometimes when I'm like with that last interview where I was like, well, I don't want to talk about things that we already know about, because we already, quote unquote, we already know about it. But I forget, like, yeah, there's like a handful of us like absolute spaceflight hardware foamers that remember and know every little bolt and detail, but I probably should have been more open to just, doing some overall reviews and not treating it as like, yeah, I know, and I will take the blame on that one, because I definitely, I think I just get that in my head of like, yeah, let's talk about something we don't know about. And then what happened with that interview, and you might notice, it might not, there's actually a lot of questions that I asked that ended up being too sensitive and too detailed, and certain areas and topics that got cut short or cut off completely, because I was asking questions that frankly I didn't know the answer to. And I guess the reason I didn't know the answer to is because it's not supposed to be public consumption, right? And so that last interview with Elon to me did feel different than the others, because I was in this weird position where, we know a lot of the stuff generally. And I felt like if I was asking questions that we knew answers to, the spaceflight community would have been mad. And then I was trying to ask questions that we didn't know answers to, and unfortunately they got so detailed that we had to cut them out. And so it left with a lot of like, yep, yeah, I know, yep, yeah, I know, and then cut. You don't get to see the good stuff. So it's been a weird position for that interview. And even like going to the tower, we weren't allowed to get any closer because of certain procedures that were happening at the time. So, even that one, like, we were hoping to go up the tower, and right before the interview, we found out that we cannot get any closer. So, unfortunately, we were stuck there. We didn't have better camera views. We didn't have better angles. We kind of just stood there at the base of the rocket as it got really, 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 really dark. And that's what we were left with. And I'm perfectly happy with that, because it's awesome. We aren't owed anything more than that, and it's amazing that SpaceX and Elon and the comms team trust us so much to allow us to even be there in the first place. I'm extremely thankful and happy for that. And I still think it makes for awesome videos, even if it's not quite giving everyone doesn't get everything they want, sadly, and that myself included on that. So yeah, these tours are so fun, like I said, kind of at the beginning of this episode. So I'm always pretty excited by them. Whenever we get an email or some kind of conversation going about tours, I get really excited. So that's where we're at with that. So let's do another question. Sorry, this is a ranty episode, or this is a long-winded episode. So this one comes from Patreon member Tom S. Thank you for your Patreon support. Why is New Glenn's, so speaking of Blue Origin and New Glenn, you'll see why I did this in this order. Why is New Glenn's first flight carrying a real satellite? Isn't the first flight very risky? So that is a fantastic question. Generally, yes, first flights are risky. A lot of unknowns, a lot of news, a lot of firsts. And generally you wouldn't want to put, a multi-billion-dollar satellite or even $100 million satellite on the first flight of a vehicle. And that's not what they're doing. The first flight of New Glenn will be Escapade, which is the bus is primarily, and the satellites are primarily built by Rocket Lab. It's a pair of satellites, and I'm pretty sure the pair of satellites fully fueled is less than 550 kilograms. These are small satellites. They're built on I believe they're based off their Photon, satellite bus. And the launch, so New Glenn and Blue Origin only got $20 million for this, which is like, you know, obviously the launch is worth, you know, 60, 80, $100 million or whatever. Because it's the first launch, they got a massive discount, $20 million. And I believe these the entire mission is under $80 million. So the satellites are quote unquote only, you know, $60 million or something, somewhere around that ballpark. And by the way, apparently the Rocket Lab price was 2 orders of magnitude cheaper than the next highest builder. So if they were, think about that. How, I mean, I can't get how it could be. I mean, maybe that's specific to like the satellite bus, maybe not the whole thing, but let's say that it's still 2 orders of magnitude, and let's say that these satellite buses are $5 million, then that means the next cheapest one is $500 million. Like, that's just crazy. But however, you know, and take that with a little grain of salt. I read that in one article, and I don't know how true that is, but still fun to think about that Rocket Lab's changing the game in the production of a lot of satellite components as well. They're not just a rocket company, despite being called Rocket Lab, that honestly some of their biggest business these days is probably going to be in the in-space flight systems and the in-space computers and hardware and satellite buses and things like that. So pretty cool to see that coming to fruition. So Escapade launching on New Glenn. So in general, like I eventually kind of got around to, the mission itself is relatively inexpensive, all things considered. It's, you know, yeah, it's a little bit higher risk because of the price tag, because they're not, you know, throwing a $250 million pair of satellites. They're throwing, you know, some cheaper satellites, $60 million satellites up towards Mars. And New Glenn is, yeah, it's going to be its first launch, but, you know, its first launch is a little different than, say, a Starship first launch, where it's not as iterative. It's more like, hey, we expect this thing to work. Like, we have done it a little bit more traditionally, where we're going to engineer this thing with a certain degree of confidence that it will work. And, you know, I expect it to be something like 90% chance of success, or 93 or something, you know, as opposed to like Starship, it's like, 50-50. If it gets off the pad, I'll be happy for the first launch, you know. And there's a 50% chance that it gets off the pad. You know, it's a different scheme, different ballpark, different game, and there's 2 sides to this coin, because it's funny when someone lobs up just a complete you know, payload, like a mass simulator, then people go, why did they put a real satellite on this thing? That seems like a waste of a launch. And then when they put a real satellite, people are like, isn't that kind of risky? Why don't they just put a mass simulator on? So there's risk and reward to both sides of this coin. And you know, realistically, it seems to be more common these days when a company rolls out a new rocket like Vulcan. It's a lot of people will sign up, raise their hand and say, hey, could we, you know, get that for like a quarter of the cost? And, you know, we'll accept a little extra risk, and we'll just, you know, hope that it's worth it. We'll roll those dice. We'll take that gamble. And, you know, if we lose our satellites, at least we, you know, they're relatively cheap satellites. So that's kind of where we're at with that. So thank you, Tom S. And let's go to the next one. This one, speaking of spacecraft going to Mars and on interplanetary missions and so on and so forth, this question comes from our Discord channel, and this is MQRIUS, which I believe is just kind of Marius. That's at least how I always read it. But yeah, the good question from them, saying, are course corrections preferably done near Earth for better accuracy, or is there nothing really stopping, example, JUICE, from doing a course correction when it's halfway to Jupiter? So the reason that I lumped this in with Escapade is because that is a trans-Mars mission where they're going to have to do some course corrections to be able to get to Mars and then to be able to, you know, orbit Mars. So course corrections, it's the earlier the better in some ways, obviously. Like, so just think of it like, you know, if you had a 10 meter long pole, right? Versus a 1 meter long pole versus a, you know, 50 centimeter pole or whatever. It's like, if you move a tiny bit on one end of a 30 meter long pole, I don't know what I said at the beginning, whatever, a long pole, and you move the tiniest little bit at one end, the other end's going to move a lot, right? So right when a spacecraft, is injecting to Mars, the tiniest little changes in courses could be hundreds of kilometers in distance, difference. Obviously, everything's an ellipse in space, so you have to think about its course as an ellipsoid, and your target as wherever it's targeting. But at the end of the day, it's the same type of thing. So you might, if you're trying to target Mars, you could do a very small correction very early on, and it has big changes. But generally, it's hard to tell how accurate you are at the close ranges. And one of the big issues too with tracking spacecraft is we mostly use Doppler shift, which is kind of two-dimensional in ways. Like, it's not very good at translating from the perspective if a vehicle is moving left to right. Like say you're looking up at the sky and a vehicle moves left to right, forward to back on that plane. It's actually kind of hard to tell how it's moving. It does a lot better towards and away from you. So, as the spacecraft is moving away from you or away from Earth, it's pretty easy to see small little changes in its velocity and its vector and be able to track it. But moving, we'll say, it's hard to explain this without visuals and stuff. But I do have a video that kind of has some visuals on this if this is confusing to you. About the Mars orbiter mission, actually. It's when NASA lost a $280 million Mars probe and it smashed into Mars instead of orbiting it. We do talk about all of these things quite a bit. So with visuals, of course. Sorry, it's going to be loud here for a second. But the reality is that you want to do your course corrections pretty early on, but it's just kind of hard to tell, how accurate that is. You kind of have to let time play out. You have to have multiple points to be able to pull your data to really get an accurate velocity and accurate position in space to really truly know, okay, here's where we're at and here's where we need to go. And later on, it's at some point, say you do a course correction really early on and your lowest impulse on a thruster might still be way too much of an adjustment, right? So there is, eventually you want to fine tune this thing and get it to be, within a kilometer or two of your desired orbital altitude around Mars. So at some point you actually want to be quote unquote less efficient, because so the answer is yes, it's both. Like it's both better to do it early on, get the big corrections out of the way, get as close as you can early on, but then the closer you get, the more fine-tuned you can get with your thrusters and with your systems. So, as you get, let's say, halfway to Mars, you have more fidelity at the cost of using more propellant to do the same amount of movement, and so on and so forth. And as you get closer, that just gets more and more extreme. So that's kind of that trade is fidelity and fine-tuning versus how efficient it is technically as far as your final orbital destination. Hope that made sense. I talked a lot. Okay, this one comes from this is just from X. Pulled this one from just a regular old. So ask your questions on anywhere and I'll look for my favorite ones. So this one comes from Really at PP Etizer, so like appetizer, but with 2 P's and 1. This one is, I have seen animations of the chopsticks catching both Starship and the booster. In this upcoming attempt, I believe they are catching only the booster. Will they be catching both when the process is worked out? Yes, they will only be catching the booster at first, and that's because they've basically proven a certain degree of accuracy with the booster to make it safe, and the risk is lower. Even though the booster is bigger and technically heavier, the risk is a little bit lower because it's not having to overfly land at all. It's simply, coming, it goes over the Gulf, comes back, and it overflies the Gulf back. So it's never really crossing over any populated areas. And like I said, they've already demonstrated the ability to touch down and control it through re-entry within a fine enough margin to feel comfortable bringing that thing back to Starbase. Obviously, they wouldn't do that if they didn't think they had a decent amount of control over it, right? And Starship, on the other hand, so far has only re-entered in one piece once, mostly in one piece, one time, and it was a few kilometers, was it 6 kilometers off course or 10 or something, off course because of, all the holes in the flaps and stuff. And so in that case, you risk having that booster or the Starship potentially land in Port Isabel or in South Padre or Brownsville or on Starbase the factory, So until they can demonstrate that they can, for sure, A, maintain orientation and not have pieces falling off of it and melting off and blowing up during reentry, and then B, control within, a few meters of their destination, of their target, then they aren't going to be sending that thing anywhere near Starbase. So that's, that's the risk, is like, if this thing can't, because when you're in orbit, of course, don't forget, you're going, 28,000 kilometers an hour, you're 17,500 miles an hour. And having any change to your interface through the atmosphere has a massive change in, kind of like what we were just talking about with orbitals, with getting to Mars. A little tiny difference at the very beginning of reentry could put you way off, especially, let's say, that if the vehicle's in some weird yaw almost, or so for instance, the space shuttle, to control its descent and reentry, it would do these big S-turns, because obviously if you banked in one direction, you'd eventually, kind of veer off course, left and right relative. I'm going to say left and right, even though it's a bad frame of reference, but you'd change your latitude basically, but we'll say left and right, and all of a sudden now if you stayed, pitched over to the right or rolled over to the right, then you could easily end up, flying over and landing in Titusville or something, or landing in Satellite Beach or whatever with the space shuttle, because you didn't, ever cancel out that change in course. So being able to, being able to control your reentry interface, it has big implications on its final landing. And right now, so far, they have a lot of data to work with. And hopefully this next launch, we see some really, really good progress being made with that. So, and I hope they, next time, I hope that it actually survives without a bunch of holes in it, and they actually splash down exactly where they intended to splash down. That would be huge and awesome. And I would still imagine they'd want to do that, prove that out 2 or 3 times before they attempt a Starship catch back at Brownsville or out back at Starbase. So there you go. That's the long-winded answer on that one. Today's a long-winded episode. And lastly, on Patreon, we have a question from Kyle Kingsbury. Thank you, Kyle, for your Patreon support. And this is, how about something a bit different for a change? What are your expectations / hopes for the next 10, 50, 100, 500 years of human spaceflight? And you're saying, feel free to change the time period to whatever makes most sense. Let's go 5, 10, 20, and 100 or something. I don't know. We'll start off with 5. In 5 years, by the end of this decade, let's see. I do hope by then we have, 2 or 3 major players doing at least, okay, here's a bold prediction. Well, this says, where do I want? Okay, I want there to be 3 major players doing full reusability in 5 years. I don't think we'll have that yet. I hope in 5 years we have at least 3 launch operators doing what SpaceX is doing today. I hope we have at least 3 operators doing first stage reuse. We have a handful of vehicles working on that right now. Obviously, we have New Glenn coming up, which should be flying, I would say, by the end of the year. Still seems relatively reasonable, and hopefully that thing just works out right away and they're able to reuse the first stage as intended. So there's one. We have Neutron working on that same thing of reuse. We have Relativity working on the same thing of reuse. We have we have Stoke working on that same thing, only they're working on a fully reusable vehicle, but their first stage will be, I think they could have the first stage worked out in 5 years and be making good progress on their upper stage, but who knows, they might surprise me and they might get to full reusability pretty quickly. You never know with those guys, they are sprinting. I'm sure I'm missing some, but people that are actually at a pretty good, obviously I think China will have landed some kind of Falcon 9 clone booster in the next 5 years and be working on that. So yeah, the reality is, my hope is that we have at least 3 players doing at least first, partial reusability. And I hope let's just say 2030, I hope by January 1st, 2030, we have 2 players that are doing fully reusable vehicles, that have fully reusable vehicles, like having proven, maybe not fully operational yet, maybe not like, how Falcon 9 landed in 2015 for the first time, but it took a couple years for them to really, get that to be the norm, where you're seeing, boosters being reused more often than you're seeing new boosters flying. So, in that same vein, I hope that by January 1st, 2030, we have, 2 companies where they have proven and recovered and perhaps reflown both stages by then, but maybe not like up to the full cadence yet. Yeah, okay, 2030, that's my hope. So 10 years from now, let's say 2034, I hope that we have valid commercial space stations going, at least a few. I hope that, let's say that by 2030, I definitely hope that humans have walked on the moon again. That's my hope. I mean, honestly, at this point though, 5 years still seems like quite a while. And I think that is for sure something that'll be within 10 years though. So I will put that into my hope that in 10 years we have people not just walking on the moon, but actually, working always on the moon, a continual, sustained presence on the moon with an actual infrastructure to be able to do that back and forth. And I hope that, by then the International Space Station will likely have been retired. It should have been retired by then. And hopefully a lot of that energy and effort and cost and price and, effort is, focused on inhabiting and working on the moon and studying the moon and learning how to live on the moon. Because I think that's a great step in general, is just, developing that system, those procedures. And, obviously living on the moon is different than living on Mars, but you can learn a ton. It's a little bit easier in some ways, it's harder in others. And it's a great step to get back to and actually learn how to spend significant time there, not just 3 days, like the longest mission, Apollo 17. So that's 10 years. Let's go 20 years. Let's go another. I hope that in 20 years we have humans on Mars. Whether or not living on there, I don't know, but perhaps within 20 years we have humans on Mars by 2044. I sure hope so. I hope that's me trying to be realistic, learning how slow this stuff is. Everyone says things, take longer than you expect, and I know this. I've known this, and I think for a long time I would have said that by 2030, I hope that humans are walking on Mars. I don't see that happening. But I do hope that, I even think 2034 is too early for humans walking on Mars. I think that realistically, but I do think it'll hopefully be in that decade. I hope in the 2030s. So by 2044, we better have had humans walk on Mars and successfully come home. That's a big part of it. And I hope that effort's not in jest and that it just all works. So that's 20 years. Let's go. I think that's going to be the next big step by 20 years is just having kind of sustained human presence on moon and getting our feet wet, so to speak, hopefully almost literally on Mars as well. And lastly, let's just go 50 years. Let's go 2074. Oh man, I hope by then we really have actual industry in space. By actual industry, I mean like it's very common to own space grade, space made materials, things that were mined on the moon and produced in space, and oh look, I've got this, this thing was cheaper and better made in 0G or in microgravity or in 1/6 gravity of the moon and blah, blah, blah. And it's commercially viable to have these materials and things brought back from outer space, because currently everything we do in outer space is coming from Earth, going up, and there's nothing of value really coming back down other than science, right? Obviously some moon rocks are highly valuable just for their novelty, but the actual raw material is not really of any, there's no produced or raw materials of any true value. So I'm talking asteroid mining, I'm talking mining the moon, producing materials on the moon, producing heavy industry in space so that it's not polluting our Earth. I'm talking about things, tangible things being used being built, produced, mined, coming from space and ending back on Earth. I think that's the big thing for 50 years. And that transition is going to be so funny. It's going to go from like, this is stupid and why, to all of a sudden like a no-brainer. I think it, like the drop of a hat. Some company is going to, be ahead of all the others on, say, mining or something like that. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's just going to pop off and everyone's going to be racing to be, it's going to be a gold rush, but in space. And that switch is going to go from impossible and dumb and stupid to try to no-brainer, solved problem, and the first couple companies doing it are going to be, the wealthiest companies in the world. That's my bet. So yeah, there you go. Dang, sorry, this was a long one. What are we at? We're probably at like 45 minutes or something stupid. Thanks for joining me on this spacewalk, guys. Don't forget to, if you like this stuff, let me know, because to be honest, like I debate whether or not these are worth it, because I could obviously just like hop on a regular live stream and do more with that and, reach more people, but I like this casual format. So let me know if you guys do like this. Leave a little review. Tell me what more you want, what less you want. People always ask for video, but frankly, I don't want you seeing my sweaty face. And it'd just be my face. We're trying to make this easy where I can just upload a 30 megabyte file off to Spencer instead of a 300 gigabyte file off to our editor Spencer, so that we can get these things done anywhere, anytime, using airplane Wi-Fi, using a hotspot, and not being reliant on having good connection to be able to upload and produce these things. So they're supposed to just be stripped down and easy, and it's a podcast. So it's hopefully just doing what a podcast should do, which is giving you some entertainment in the car or on your walk or whatever. So let me know. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. We're getting ready. By the time this comes out, hopefully hopefully this comes out before the launch of Polaris Dawn. And if you are still listening to this, and if you are not planning to watch or pay attention to anything with Polaris Dawn, in my opinion, is the biggest, most important, and most incredible mission so far of my lifetime, because it's really ambitious. I have a few interviews with Jared Isaacman and with the crew as well about the mission and why it's special, why it's crazy. They've done a lot of novel things and new things to be able to do a spacewalk with brand new EVA suits. The first time we've done a new EVA suit in how long? I mean, come on. And a SpaceX EVA suit that looks amazing. It's going to be an incredible mission, and we're wishing them the absolute best of luck. As of the recording of this, we're 2 scrubs in, one for a ground side helium leak that was addressed and fixed right away, pretty normal, and the other was for weather, specifically in the recovery operations. This mission is pretty demanding as far as a performance and timing perspective. They're trying really hard to avoid micrometeors and having to thread the needle between just getting out there to this high altitude they're trying to get to, 1,400 kilometers. So what is that, like 900 miles in altitude, which is the highest anyone's been since the Gemini program. And it'll be the highest orbit ever of the Earth. If you, because technically all the Apollo missions that went to the moon on a TLI, they, are technically orbiting the moon or using, I guess, Apollo 8, like free return trajectories. What is that? That's still technically an Earth orbit, just interfacing with the moon. I don't know how that works. But as far as just purely orbiting the Earth, this will be the highest mission ever. It's going to be incredible. So I hope you guys are joining. I will be doing a fundraiser stream. So I found out, it was a couple years ago or whatever for the, I didn't realize when I was doing one of the streams that all of the proceeds automatically do go straight to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital through YouTube. I used to think YouTube still took their like 30% cut that they would normally take for a super chat. So for one of these streams, I was encouraging people to donate directly via a link and all this stuff. Nope, just do a donation right in YouTube. It all goes straight to St. Jude. And it'll show that it's all, a legitimate thing, obviously. So I encourage you, if you have a little money set aside to help support this mission and the ultimate mission of Jared's crew, which is supporting St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, consider doing it on the stream. It'd mean a lot to me just to know that you're there to support and there to witness history and there to support not only the crew, but also a really good cause. So hope to see you guys there. But thanks again for joining me on the spacewalk. We'll see you next time.